Hello. What's up? Stand up, Nash. This is the first in a series of videos where I just talk to you and you like it. Nothing you can do about it, I guess, except turn it off or not watch it altogether. um, yeah, this my portion of the online section of the course will be this. Instead of responding to every single comment, which would never end with 3 classes. I'd never finish. I'd be constantly doing that. And I just don't have the time to only do that. This is going to be my portal to you, or vice versa. So I'll post one of these for every different comedian and respond to your comments, just so it's sort of interactive that way. So we did Lenny Bruce last week, and I think that's the only logical place to start a course on stand-up comedy is with Lenny Bruce, because he was the catalyst for changing basically how comedy worked, even from a practical standpoint on stage, and from a impact, cultural impact point of view as well. I mentioned this before. I might reiterate things that we talked about in class and stuff like that. So forgive me. But before him, most comics were just set up punchline, right? One line, a lot of one-liners. And after him, that type of comedy became sort of obsolete or dying breed. I mean, guys who continued to do it, well into the 80s or 90s or whatever, like Rodney Dangerfield or Don Rickles. 2 guys survived that, right? So there's, that stuff's funny, but the difference was it's not connected to anything, right? So take my wife, please. That's a Henny Youngman joke. That's sort of become the emblem of that type of Catskills comedy. And, Rodney Dangerfield, I get no respect. So all his jokes are these just made up premises and scenarios that are meant to make him look like a fool. His wife is always cheating on him, right? His doctor says he's dying. His parents never loved him. Like all this stuff and these quick one-liners. They're like yo mama jokes. I guess when you break it down, those are funny. But like in a show of that's an hour long, by like 10 minutes in, you're like, oh, this is just gonna be this kind of thing. And there's no connection to reality. You realize very quickly if you watch Rodney Dangerfield that none of this stuff actually happened to him, right? Which doesn't make it any more or less funny, but it makes it a lot less authentic and honest, right? And if there's anything that Lenny Bruce was at this time, it was brutally honest, right? And authentic. And he made that a commodity. He made that something to aspire to or strive for as a comedian, to be honest and truthful and seek the truth, and and make that journey or that process funny. So it's a stark difference, and you can mark most comedians, and we'll talk about this more with George Carlin, when we get to him, but he talked about it more specifically. every comedian has an arc. I might have talked about this the first week of class. And usually you start out just, how do I make them laugh? By any means necessary, right? You make a fool of yourself, you fall down, physical comedy, you know, um, puns and different little cute little tricks to make people laugh. But then if you continue to progress and grow, you need more. The performer needs more than just that. Um, and a lot of comedians talk about this in their career arcs. It's like, yeah, I just did this. I had an hour that people laughed at. Like, I didn't give a shit about it. It was just, these were the jokes I said. And then eventually you realize, like, what have I been doing? Like, I don't care. If I don't care about my material or what I'm talking about, why would anybody, you know? So that's, that I think becomes important to people over time. And this class might accelerate that process for you guys. Um, so yeah, all the Lenny Bruce stuff sort of forged, you know, everything he was doing was new territory, and just like people were noticing, right? So the next comedians that we're gonna watch, at least today, definitely, and then next week, and then almost every comedian since owes a debt of gratitude to Lenny Bruce for just the shit that he had to wade through to get, you know, to get us here, I guess. Um, so a couple things about comedy in general. Like, I think we mentioned this before, but like, comedy, I think, as good or better than anything else, provides access to ideas, discussions, like topics that might otherwise be ignored or avoided. Um, why? Because you let your guard down, right? And you're not as tense when you're laughing, or when you're in a comedic setting. Um, you're more open minded. You're listening more, right? Like, all these things are things that most of us need to do more of in our lives. And comedy, like, you need to do those things to even understand comedy. That's something about stand up or comedy in general that people overlook, right? It gets this it gets shit on because it's many times it's silly or it's stupid or it's childish or whatever, and it's not intelligent, it's not smart, it doesn't require intellect or whatever. But I've always argued this flawlessly, might I add. But humor is way more difficult to wrap your head around than, let's just say, math, right? Everyone holds, oh, math, oh, it's so hard and it's so sophisticated, and it's so, you have to be so smart and intelligent and have a sharp mind and intellect to be able to understand math. But humor, oh, those fucks over there, they don't know anything about being intelligent at all. But don't they? Like, really think about it. You can teach anyone math, like rudimentary, simple math, even up through, I don't know, calculus can go fuck itself. I sucked at it. But math in general is, I think, you can teach math to anybody. And In fact, we do. Like, that's what we do. That's what school is in many cases. So because it's empirical, because an answer. You can teach formulas. You can teach, you know, different equations. Is that a math thing? I don't know. Humor has so much nuance to it. You have to be more mentally agile to understand a joke than you have to be to understand a math equation. And think about the term sense of humor itself. Like, even the funniest person in the world who just gets everything is always like super sharp and just like, yeah. He or she only has a sense of humor. Like, even the most honed and sharpened comedic minds still only have a sense of it. You never figure it out 100%. Whereas math, you can learn math. So, like, which is more cognitively uh, challenging? The thing that you can teach to any moron, or the thing that even the experts only have a sense of? I don't know. You tell me where I'm wrong. So when people say, "Oh, comedy's, you know, stupid or whatever," just be like, "You're wrong, dude. Like, there's so much that goes into a single joke, or, and I'm not even talking about jokes. Like, the great, the last of the great joke tellers was Don Rickles, and he's dead. But I'm talking about comedy today. The things that you have to incorporate to even just to understand or navigate it, right? You have to understand context. You have to understand language. You have to understand current events, like things that are going on in the world. You have to understand tone. You have to understand um, um, different cultural references, right? I mean, all those things go into making a joke funny and clever and, you know, interesting. It doesn't just numb your ears like, the jokes of old. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of you might get this vibe from me through the course of the semester because I've been fighting this fight for, you know, 15 plus years. Like, a lot of what we're doing in class is fighting for legitimacy, right? To make comedy this legitimate academic pursuit or academic study. And, I've always said this as well. Um, what makes something academic is the passion with which you pursue it, right? Like, so anyone who says, "Oh, stand-up comedy," like, what do you even do in that class? Um, it doesn't matter if you are passionate about something and you throw yourself into it, your mind into it. It's academic. You can talk intelligently about anything. Um, why not comedy? Why not stand up? Um, so a little bit more about Lenny Bruce. Some of you may have had a taste of Lenny Bruce from Marvelous Miss Maisel. If you watch that, like, that's her sort of comedy counterpart, or comedy Sherpa, I guess, kind of guiding her through, bailing her out of jail, all that stuff. That's Lenny Bruce. And it's interesting to see him in that context because, we kind of know so little about his life, right? We watched that documentary, and even that was kind of had some holes in it that were like, who was he really? So I think that that show, The Marvelous Miss Maisel, does a good job of kind of like taking what we know about Lenny Bruce and so kind of shaping his identity, like what he would have been like, you know, to work with and to like how he would have perceived this young female comic trying to break into the business and yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting parallels there. Um, and that also I think indicates to some extent like his popularity at the time. Like I don't think we can properly put that into perspective. Um, but so going through your comments, most of you, you know, nailed the. Most of you put out the, wow, I'd never heard of him. It was surprising to see his impact, which is good. That's partly what this course is about too, is exposing you to different voices and ideas and things like that. Um, so I think something that came up briefly in class and that I saw in your comments as well was this idea that Lenny Bruce broke down these barriers and I mean, you could argue he gave his life for these battles with censorship and the First Amendment and changing the form of stand up, right? You could argue that. Maybe it's a little melodramatic, but whatever. Um, only to have like people kind of abuse it. That makes any sense? The Lisa Lampanelli example is perfect. Like her place in that documentary was out of place. Like why was she in there? Saying that putting her in the same discussion as Lenny Bruce and what he did with her, like shitty material, just seems disingenuous. And that's something that happened and was controversial going forward. Was like, this guy did all this, and this is what we do with it. Like, and that's a popular sort of phenomenon that you see all over the world, or all over this country at least, is like somebody or there's some, I'll argue this, most good ideas are ruined by people, right? We reduce a great idea down to its, you know, its worst aspects, and it's usually just to make money. So like you kind of see that in stand. I'll give you an example. There are plenty of examples, but one example is the music industry, right? Like music as a concept, as a thing, is amazing, right? It's transformative, it's powerful. You sitting in your room trying to write a song to get laid, like that's music. That's real. It's powerful. It's pure. It's a pure idea. What did we do, we as human beings, basically, mostly white dudes, what did white dudes do with the this beautiful pure concept of music? We said, how can we make money on this? And what happened? You get rock and roll, right? And it's about image, and it's about repeating things, and it's about, selling, you know, selling love to teenagers, and like doing all this other shit, and it gets watered down to its worst elements, but makes a ton of money. It's like music is pure, like rock and roll, quote unquote, is this cheap exploitation of music. And when you start using this sort of paradigm, you can plug in a lot of things, right? Learning and education, right? Learning is awesome. It really is. The fact that you can learn things, you can not know things and then know things is it's revelational. Revelational? Revolutionary. It's revelational. I'm going with revelational. So, but what does education do with learning? Education's not about learning. It's about memorizing, it's about regurgitating, it's about, going through the motions. Like our education system beats, like nobody wants to learn. Like learning should be something that you wake up every day like, what can I learn today? But our education system is counter to that. It zaps you of that passion to learn things, with routine and memorization and the drudgery of education. So learning is awesome. Education is bullshit. So comedy is kind of the same is kind of the same way with Lenny Bruce. Like Lenny Bruce started this new kind of comedy basically, right? And what did we do with it? We picked the one thing out of it that is cheap and easy, which is like just vulgarity, right? The ability to now use profanity gratuitously, uh, for laughs. And there's a litany of comedians who just miss the point, right? Like that's not what Lenny Bruce was fighting for at all. I mean, it was on some level, but like he was doing more with this platform, and you should too. And there are comedians who took it seriously, right? Richard Pryor, Carlin, Bill Hicks. Um, and we'll get into those as we go, but there are also ones who are just like, you know, sort of coasting on, yeah, this whole just misinterpreting it. Like you miss the point. You don't get it. You're doing it wrong. And it's I think Lisa Lampanelli is the perfect example, right? And even the way she talks about her act in the documentary is frustrating because it's like I'm glad that most of you picked it out and were like, wait, that doesn't sound right. That's not what Lenny Bruce was doing. Lenny Bruce didn't fight so that you could be, so that you could be a professional asshole. Like that was my quote in class last week. Like a lot of people took it that way. Like, oh, I can be a complete asshole now with no repercussions. Finally, right? Like if that's your reaction to Lenny Bruce's um, to Lenny Bruce's victories or whatever struggle, then you miss the point. So Lenny Bruce he's the foundation of this course. That's why I spent the whole week on him last week. So we're moving forward now, and just keep that in mind as we go. Like there will be times where you'll hear Lenny Bruce in jokes or stories, and you'll make connections between a lot of these comedians that go back to Lenny Bruce. So by all means, keep your keep your ears open and make note of it when you make those connections, because it's interesting in comedy, if nothing else, is kind of it has that kind of lineage, right? You can trace, you can connect comedians from now back to Lenny Bruce, pretty easily, in some interesting ways too. So I'll see half of you today and the other half on Thursday. So can't wait.